The waiting room at Riverside Medical Center felt like a sanctuary of soft lighting and gentle music, but for Emily Rose Patterson, it might as well have been a courtroom where she was about to face judgment. At 28, Emily had spent the last 3 years avoiding this moment, making excuses, cancelling appointments, and pretending that her problem would somehow just disappear on its own. She sat in the comfortable chair, her blonde hair falling like a curtain around her face, wearing her favorite white top and pink skirt because familiar clothes felt like armor against the vulnerability she was about to face. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she found herself staring at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of other patients who seemed so much more confident about being there. Emily's condition wasn't life-threatening, wasn't visible to casual observers, and wasn't something that would appear in medical textbooks as a dramatic case study. But it had slowly, quietly stolen her confidence, her social life, and her sense of normalcy in ways that felt impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it themselves. Severe social anxiety with selective mutism. The words sounded clinical and manageable when she read them online, but the reality was that Emily often found herself completely unable to speak in situations that other people navigated effortlessly. Job interviews, social gatherings, even ordering food at restaurants could leave her silent and panicked, trapped inside her own mind while the world waited for responses she couldn't give. The condition had cost her 3 job opportunities, several friendships, and countless moments where she'd wanted to participate in life but found herself paralyzed by an invisible barrier that seemed insurmountable. Emily Patterson. A gentle voice called from the doorway leading to the examination rooms. Emily looked up to see a nurse with kind eyes and a warm smile, gesturing toward the hallway. With a deep breath that felt more like surrender than courage, Emily gathered her purse and followed, her heart racing with the familiar mixture of hope and dread that came with seeking help. The examination room was painted in soothing green tones, with white shelving units that held medical supplies and inspirational prints about healing and wellness. Emily settled onto the blue examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her as she tried to find a comfortable position for what was sure to be an uncomfortable conversation. "Dr. Anderson will be with you in just a moment," the nurse said gently. "He's wonderful with anxiety disorders, so you're in excellent hands." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly even for a simple thank you. She'd researched Dr. Anderson online, knew he was young and well regarded, but she'd also seen the impressive list of degrees and certifications that made her feel even more inadequate about her inability to function in basic social situations. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door, and Emily looked up to see a man who appeared to be in his early 30s entering the room. Dr. James Anderson had brown hair and gentle eyes, and he wore his white coat with the comfortable familiarity of someone who genuinely enjoyed his work. What struck Emily immediately was the way he moved slowly and deliberately, never rushing, never creating the sense of urgency that made her anxiety spike. "Good afternoon, Emily," Dr. Anderson said, settling into the chair across from her with an unhurried ease. "I'm Dr. Anderson, but please call me James if you're more comfortable with that. I'm really glad you decided to come in today." Emily opened her mouth to respond, then felt the familiar tightening in her throat that signaled the beginning of one of her episodes. No words came out, just a small sound of frustration that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "It's okay," James said immediately, his voice carrying no judgment, only understanding. "Take your time. There's no pressure to speak if it doesn't feel right in this moment." Something in his tone made Emily look at him more carefully. Most doctors she'd encountered, even kind ones, had an underlying expectation that patients would be able to communicate normally. But James seemed genuinely comfortable with silence, as if he understood that sometimes words weren't immediately available. "Would it help if I told you a little about myself first?" James asked gently. "Sometimes it's easier to open up to someone when you know you're not alone in struggling with things that seem easy for other people." Emily nodded, grateful for anything that might break the tension she felt building in her chest. "I became interested in anxiety disorders because I lived with severe social anxiety through most of my teenage years and early 20s, James began, his voice taking on the thoughtful cadence of someone sharing something personal. "I couldn't speak in classes, couldn't make phone calls, couldn't even order pizza without having panic attacks. For years, I thought there was something fundamentally wrong with me." Emily felt her eyes widen with surprise. This confident, articulate doctor had experienced what she was going through. "I know that look," James said with a gentle smile. "It's hard to believe that someone who seems to have it all figured out could understand what it's like to be trapped inside your own mind. But I spent years feeling like I was watching life through a window, wanting to participate but unable to break through the glass." Emily felt something loosening in her chest, a knot of shame and isolation that had been tight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "The thing that changed everything for me," James continued, "was meeting a doctor who didn't just treat my symptoms, but who understood that anxiety disorders aren't character flaws or weaknesses. They're medical conditions that deserve the same respect and treatment as any other health challenge." "How?" Emily began, then stopped, surprised that the word had actually emerged. "How did I get better?" James asked, and Emily nodded. "Very slowly, and with a lot of help. Therapy, medication when it was needed, and most importantly, learning that my worth as a person wasn't determined by my ability to speak up in every situation." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness but from the relief of being understood by someone who truly knew what her daily experience felt like. "I also," James said quietly, "was fortunate enough to have financial resources that made treatment easier. My family had money, and later, I was able to build a successful practice that allowed me to give back to people who couldn't afford the kind of comprehensive care that helped me heal." Emily looked at him with new understanding. "My family owns Anderson Medical Group and several other healthcare facilities throughout the state," James explained matter-of-factly. "But the money didn't cure my anxiety, Emily. It just gave me access to resources that everyone deserves to have." Over the next hour, Emily found herself talking more freely than she had in months. James's combination of professional expertise and personal understanding created a space where her words felt safe, where her struggles felt valid rather than shameful. "I lost my job 6 months ago," Emily finally admitted, her voice small but steady. "I couldn't speak up in meetings, couldn't present ideas, couldn't even ask questions when I needed clarification. My supervisor said I wasn't engaging enough for their company culture." "That must have been incredibly painful," James said, and Emily could hear genuine empathy in his voice. "I've been living with my parents since then, and they're wonderful, but they don't understand why I can't just push through it or be more confident," Emily continued. "They love me, but they think I'm choosing to be this way." "Anxiety disorders are invisible disabilities," James said gently. "People who haven't experienced them often can't understand that you're not choosing to be silent or anxious any more than someone with diabetes is choosing to need insulin." As their session continued, James outlined a treatment plan that felt both comprehensive and manageable. Therapy with a specialist who understood selective mutism, potential medication options to explore, and gradual exposure exercises designed to help Emily rebuild her confidence in social situations. "But here's what I want you to know," James said as their time together drew to a close. "You are not broken. You are not less valuable because you process social situations differently. And with the right support, you can absolutely learn to manage this condition in ways that allow you to live the life you want." "Dr. Anderson." "James," Emily said, her voice growing stronger, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you still struggle with anxiety sometimes?" James smiled, and for a moment, Emily could see the young man who had once been as frightened and isolated as she felt now. "Every day," he said honestly. "But I've learned that managing anxiety isn't about making it disappear completely. It's about developing tools and strategies that help you live fully despite the anxiety, and surrounding yourself with people who understand and support your journey." "I can't afford," Emily began, then stopped, embarrassed about discussing money. "Emily," James said gently, "I told you about my financial situation because I believe that good mental health care should be available to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. I run a foundation that provides treatment for people with anxiety disorders. Your treatment will be covered completely." Emily felt tears spilling over as the weight of years of suffering and shame finally began to lift. "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" "Because 10 years ago, I was sitting where you're sitting now, feeling hopeless and alone," James replied. "Someone helped me when I couldn't help myself, and now I have the opportunity to pass that gift forward." 6 months later, Emily walked into the conference room at Morrison Digital Marketing with her shoulders straight and her voice ready. She'd been working there for 2 months as a content coordinator, a position that James had helped her find through his network of colleagues who understood the value of diverse perspectives and experiences. She still experienced anxiety, still had days when speaking felt challenging, but she now had tools to manage those moments instead of being controlled by them. More importantly, she'd learned that her sensitivity and thoughtfulness, qualities that came partly from her struggles with anxiety, were actually strengths in her work helping companies communicate with empathy and authenticity. "Good morning, everyone," Emily said clearly as she began her presentation on the company's new client campaign. "Today I want to talk about how we can reach people who feel like they're invisible in our society, and why those voices matter so much." As she spoke, Emily thought about James, who had not only provided her with medical treatment but had shown her that success could be measured not just in professional achievements, but in the courage to be vulnerable, the wisdom to seek help, and the generosity to help others once you've found your own healing. Sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in prescription bottles or therapy textbooks, but in the simple recognition that we're not alone in our struggles, that someone else has walked the difficult path we're traveling, and that healing is possible when we find the courage to trust others with our pain. In a world that often mistakes silence for weakness, Emily Patterson had learned that true strength sometimes comes not from speaking loudly, but from speaking honestly, and that the most important conversations often begin with the simple admission that we need help finding our voice.